Paige Bueckers has ended the debate with Rookie of the Year with Sona Citron. She put on a masterclass performance, but what is making headlines and really scratching people's heads and turning people's heads, not Paige Bueckers' actual performance, but the way the opposing teams all season long has been allowing her to score at will.
The WNBA world was left stunned after Paige Bueckers dropped an eye-popping 44 points against the Los Angeles Sparks. But what should have been a story about pure talent quickly turned into something much darker. Fans didn't just celebrate the performance, they began questioning whether they had just witnessed one of the most blatant examples of manufactured hype in league history.
But let's be serious. There's no traps being ran on Paige. She's getting wide open looks, and I got the evidence here to prove it. And at the end of the day, Paige Bueckers is basically being propped upon to replace Caitlin. There's no doubt about it in my mind. This league would rather have Paige be the face of the league over Caitlin any day.
Clips from the game showed defenders stepping back, refusing to trap, and practically opening the lane for Paige to score at will. Instead of praising her skills, many wondered if players were deliberately helping her shine, fueling a storm of accusations that shook the basketball community. Why was Paige given this freedom when Caitlin Clark faces double teams every night? Why was one player handed the spotlight while another earns it the hard way? The answers sparked panic, outrage, and a war of words that the league couldn't ignore.
That Paige Bueckers is getting these open looks on purpose. On purpose. Literally, they're letting her score at will.
Paige Bueckers' performance against the Los Angeles Sparks should have been remembered as a historic moment of pure dominance. 44 points in a professional game is no small feat, and it immediately placed her at the center of every headline. Social media erupted with highlights of her shooting stroke, her smooth mid-range jumpers, and her calm finishing at the rim. Commentators rushed to crown her the next face of the WNBA, while fans pushed narratives that she had ended the debate over who deserved Rookie of the Year. On the surface, it was a story of a young player rising into super, but beneath the glow of those numbers, something about the night didn't sit right with veteran fans and analysts. When the tape was reached, patterns began to emerge that turned admiration into suspicion.
This is some of the highlights from Paige Bueckers last night. Now, Paige Bueckers had 44 points, 4 rebounds. She was 4-4 from 3, and she played a whopping 36 minutes. And just like I told y'all, bro, Paige is scoring at will. They are allowing Paige to score.
The first red flag came from how defenders approached her instead of swarming her with double teams or forcing her into tough decisions. As teams routinely do with Caitlin Clark, Paige often found herself in wide-open situations. At several points, defenders were literally standing behind her on jump shots positions where they had no chance of contesting. Plays that should have resulted in traps, help side rotations, or at least a contested look turned into uncontested. Opportunities that Paige calmly buried, fans quickly pointed out the obvious.
So if you watch this shot right here, that is a 3. I don't know who that is sticking on her. Y'all know me, man. I don't be knowing all these damn players. But as you can see, the defender is clearly behind Paige. There's no way she's blocking this shot. How is you blocking this shot when you're behind Paige?
How does a player score at will without a single adjustment from the opposing team? It wasn't just one mistake, one missed rotation, or one lapse in effort. It was a pattern that continued from the first quarter to the final whistle. Lane after lane opened up for her, three-point shots went uncontested, and transition defense seemed to vanish whenever Paige was involved.
Look at this, wide open. Where's the traps? Like, come on, bro. We can't make this up, bro. Where is the trap on Paige? Where, like, look, you got defender here, defender there. There are 3 Spark players in the vicinity. 1, 2, 3 Spark players in the vicinity of Paige. No trap, no nothing. Why do she get a wide open?
This wasn't the kind of defensive attention that other rookies or rising stars have to endure. It looked like something else entirely, something orchestrated to put her performance on display. The comparisons to Caitlin Clark only made the suspicions louder. Clark rarely touches the ball without being blitzed by defenders, trapped at the top of the key, or shoved off her rhythm by aggressive matchups. Yet Paige was given the freedom to glide into her spots, as though defenders were hesitant to even touch her. For many fans, it felt less like a game and more like a staged showcase and attempt to push a narrative that Paige was already surpassing.
Paige really do make good plays, but a lot of the times, bro, she be wide open. Look, wide open. Why do Paige have a wide open lane? Watch this. Defender there, wide open. She didn't even contest the shot. She basically paused and stopped running.
Clark. This theory grew legs because it lined up with a broader storyline that has been floating all season. The league's desire to find an alternative star to Caitlin, while Clark's impact on ticket sales and TV ratings has been undeniable. She has also been a lightning rod for criticism, jealousy, and hostility. Some believe the WNBA would prefer to spotlight a player who doesn't spark as much division. And Paige, with her skill set and clean image, fits that mold perfectly. Still, legends of the game weren't buying the hype so easily. To them, the 44 points raised as many questions as they answered. And once they weighed in, the entire conversation took a sharp turn. As Paige Bueckers' 44-point showcase continued to dominate highlight reels, the conversation quickly spilled beyond fans and media. Former players, analysts, and WNBA legends began weighing in, and their voices carried an authority that shook the narrative apart. They weren't swept up by the excitement of a single stat line. Instead, they focused on the deeper basketball reality, how those points were scored, and why the defensive intensity looked suspiciously absent. Legends who had spent years grinding through tough matchups and suffocating defenses immediately noticed the gap. They pointed out that Caitlin Clark, night after night, faces traps the moment she crosses half court. Opponents bump her off screens, deny her touches, and swarm her with multiple defenders. Yet Paige, in this supposed breakout game, was often left to roam free, calmly walking into jumpers without the slightest contest. Two veterans who built their reputations on competitiveness, it didn't feel like a normal WNBA game. It felt manipulated. Some legends went further, suggesting the league's priorities might be influencing what happens on the court. They argued that when ticket sales, TV ratings, and sponsorships are on the line, certain stars are given more breathing room. One voice compared it to the way referees, in past eras, favored marketable stars, allowing them extra space. Fewer whistles, or more leniency to rack up big performances. If Paige was being granted that luxury, it wasn't because of her talent alone, but because the league had chosen her as a safer alternative to Clark. The harshest criticism came from those who had played through eras when respect had to be earned, possession by possession. They emphasized that greatness is proven by overcoming obstacles, not by having them removed. For them, Paige's 44 points didn't represent dominance, it represented the opposite. A moment where the competitive balance of the league looked compromised. These legends weren't attacking Paige personally, but they were blunt about the circumstances. A performance loses meaning if defenses refuse to compete with the same intensity they show against others. Fans seized on these comments, replaying clips alongside the critiques. Every wide-open jumper became evidence. Every uncontested drive felt like proof that the game had been tilted in her favor. What was once celebrated as a breakthrough performance was now being dissected as potential proof of manipulation. The legends' voices gave weight to what many fans already suspected. This wasn't just about basketball. It was about control, marketing, and image. And yet, even as legends spoke out, defenders of Paige doubled down. They insisted that 44 points cannot be dismissed, no matter the circumstances. They accused critics of jealousy, of trying to downplay her talent, but the debate wasn't dying down, it was exploding. What began as a highlight reel soon turned into a full-blown controversy, and it exposed a deeper question: was being protected and promoted. Then what did that mean for the players who had been carrying the league under much harsher treatment? When the dust began to settle after Paige Bueckers' 44-point night, the conversation shifted from her stat line to something far more unsettling: the possibility that the league itself was nudging her into the spotlight. Fans who had been following the WNBA closely knew this wasn't just about one game. For months, whispers had circulated that the league desperately wanted to redirect attention away from Caitlin Clark, whose arrival brought record-breaking ticket sales, surging TV ratings, and a level of star power women's basketball had never seen. But with that spotlight came backlash, rivalries, and a constant storm of controversy. To league executives, Paige represented a cleaner, more controllable face for the future. It wasn't hard to see why. Paige has long been marketed as the prototypical star-polished interviews, calm demeanor, and a silky skill set that looks tailor-made for highlight reels. By contrast, Caitlyn's fiery personality and relentless competitiveness made her polarizing. Some adored her intensity, while others, players and fans alike, resented her for it. The league's problem wasn't Caitlyn's talent, which was undeniable, but rather the culture war that followed her everywhere she went. Paige, by comparison, looked like a safer investment. And so, the narrative began to form. The WNBA had its preferred star, and the pieces were being arranged to elevate her. The Los Angeles game became Exhibit A. How else could you explain the repeated lapses in defense? How else could you justify the lack of adjustments from a professional coaching staff? Theories spread quickly online. Some believed referees and coaches were under subtle pressure to allow Paige's breakout. Others suggested it was less conspiracy and more calculated, marketing the league needing a news story to balance Caitlyn's overwhelming dominance. Whatever the reason, fans and legends agreed on one thing: Paige was not facing the same uphill battle that others, particularly Clark, had been forced to endure. This suspicion wasn't without precedent. Sports history is filled with examples where leagues leaned into certain stars to drive revenue. The NBA in the 1980s famously leaned on Magic Johnson and Larry Bird to revive popularity. Later, the spotlight shifted almost entirely onto Michael Jordan. When a league finds someone they believe can transcend the game, they move mountains to make it happen. Fans watching Paige's effortless scoring night couldn't help but feel they were witnessing the WNBA trying to script its own version of that story. But the problem with scripting stars is that it clashes with authenticity. Basketball is supposed to be about competition, about talent rising naturally under pressure. When fans start to feel like outcomes are manipulated or certain players are given unfair advantages, the credibility of the league suffers. And that was the danger now facing the WNBA. By seemingly pushing Paige to the forefront, they were risking alienating the very audience Caitlyn had brought to the game. Still, none of this slowed the chatter online. Instead, it poured gasoline on the fire, and as the debate grew louder, another name was suddenly pulled into the storm: Angel Reese, whose struggles only deepened the comparisons. The fallout from Paige Bueckers' 44-point performance didn't stay confined to game highlights or analyst discussions. It spilled into the online trenches, where fan bases clashed in heated debates that went beyond basketball. On one side were fans who eagerly embraced Paige's breakout, proclaiming her the rightful heir to the WNBA spotlight. They flooded social media with posts declaring her better than Caitlyn Clark, holding up her scoring explosion as proof that the league had found its next superstar. But on the other side, skeptics, including many longtime fans, to the glaring defensive lapses, the lack of traps, and the strange ease with which Paige piled up points. For them, it wasn't about hating Paige, but about calling out what they saw as manufactured hype. This is where the culture war ignited. The group now labeled woke fans clung to the narrative that Paige was more deserving of the league's crown because she fit a more marketable image. They celebrated her clean-cut persona, her calm interviews, and the fact that she didn't stir as much controversy as Caitlyn. They framed her success as proof that the WNBA was better off moving in a new direction. But that framing collided head-on with reality. Ticket sales, viewership numbers, and attendance all told the same story. It was Caitlyn Clark driving the surge in interest, not Paige. Even as Paige put up flashy numbers, empty seats in arenas showed the gap between perception and truth. The online arguments grew nastier by the day. Critics mocked Paige's supporters for ignoring context, asking why she wasn't guarded with the same ferocity Caitlyn faced. They highlighted statistics showing Clark's relentless impact even under constant double teams, contrasting it with Paige's free-flowing performance against defenders who looked like they were barely trying. Every clip of a defender stepping aside became ammunition. Every angle of an uncontested shot went viral as evidence. The legend of the 44-point game was being rewritten in real time as a cautionary tale of how quickly narratives can collapse under scrutiny, and then came the blowback from former players. Legends chimed in, reinforcing what many critics were already saying. They stressed that true greatness isn't about one game or inflated stats, but about consistency under pressure, about winning when the odds are stacked against you. By those standards, Caitlin had already proven herself repeatedly, while Paige still had much to prove. These comments didn't just sting, they enraged Paige's most vocal supporters, who accused the legends of bias and gatekeeping. But here's the reality. No amount of online tantrums could change the facts. The numbers favored Caitlin, the eye test favored Caitlin, and the legends sided with Caitlin. Paige was undeniably talented, but the idea that she had already surpassed Clark was built on shaky ground. As the fan wars escalated, the narrative took a darker turn when Angel Reese's name was suddenly dragged into the debate, adding another explosive layer to the controversy. Just when the debate over Paige Bueckers and Caitlin Clark seemed intense enough, Angel Reese's name was thrown into the fire, turning a heated argument into a full-blown storm. Reese, once hyped as one of the brightest young stars of the league, had already been facing scrutiny after failing to lift her team into playoff contention for the second straight year, while Caitlin dragged her squad into the postseason despite constant double teams and relentless defensive pressure. Angel found herself on the outside looking in, her season cut short, and her reputation taking another hit. The contrast was glaring, and fans wasted no time using it as fuel in the ongoing war. For Paige's supporters, Reese became a convenient shield. They argued that if Angel another hyped rookie Couds struggled this badly, then Paige's 40 game should be seen as extraordinary rather than manufactured. They painted Reese as proof that not every young star could shine under the spotlight, claiming Paige's performance showed rare poise and elite talent. But this argument quickly backfired. Critics countered that Angel's struggles actually highlighted how different the standards were when it came to Caitlin Clark. Clark was expected to carry her team immediately, while Paige and Angel were allowed to stumble or be elevated by circumstances beyond their control. Legends of the game didn't hesitate to join in on this angle either. They pointed out that in professional basketball, winning matters more than stat lines. Reese's inability to lead her team into the playoffs, despite being surrounded by talent, raised questions about her consistency. Meanwhile, Caitlin, even in her rookie season, elevated her teammates and brought her franchise back into the playoff picture. When compared side by side, the gap in impact was undeniable. The conversation wasn't just about individual talent. Anymore, it was about who could change the trajectory of a franchise. And Caitlin was proving she could do exactly that. Reese, for her part, remained quiet publicly, but her absence from the spotlight didn't stop fans from dragging her name. Through endless online debates, memes flooded Twitter and Instagram, mocking her playoff exit and contrasting it with Caitlin's rise. Paige's 44-point performance became another stick used to beat Reese with, despite the obvious flaws in that comparison. After all, if Paige's scoring spree came against defenders who barely lifted a hand, then what did it really prove about her ability to handle pressure? What the Reese angle truly did was expose how fractured the WNBA's fanbase had become. Instead of uniting around the growing visibility of women's basketball, factions were tearing one another apart, weaponizing players against each other in constant battles over who deserved the crown. Paige's hype, Angel's struggles, and Caitlin's undeniable dominance became interconnected threads in a larger story about favoritism, media spin, and league politics. And as the dust continued to rise, attention shifted to one undeniable: truth, regardless of the narratives being pushed. The cold numbers told a very different story, one that pointed squarely back to Caitlin Clark. When the noise around Paige Bueckers' 44 points and Angel Reese's struggles began to dominate the headlines, fans and legends alike turned to the one thing that could not be manipulated: numbers. Not box score numbers, but the kind that determine the future of the league attendance and revenue. And here is where the Paige versus Caitlin debate collapsed under its own weight. Because while Paige's big night created a flurry of social media chatter, it did not move the needle at the box office. The seats in Los Angeles remained scattered with empty rows, a telling sign that the hype did not translate into demand. By contrast, Caitlin Clark had already proven she was a walking economic engine. Every arena she visited saw ticket sales spike. Teams hosting her suddenly set franchise records for single-game revenue. TV broadcasts featuring her games consistently outdrew those without her, sometimes by margins the league had never seen before. Merch sales told the same story, with Caitlin's jersey sitting at the top of the charts and selling out within hours. These weren't manufactured narratives or social media illusions, they were measurable results, the kind that no amount of online debating could erase. This reality became the sharpest weapon in the hands of Caitlin's defenders. They argued that the league's attempt to anoint Paige as the next face was short-sighted and reckless. How could executives ignore the fact that Caitlin had already transformed the WNBA into must-watch television for millions of new fans? Why pretend a 44-point night in front of half-empty stands held more weight than the undeniable surge of revenue and attention? Caitlin brought every single game. Legends echoed this sentiment, warning that credibility and growth were at risk if the league prioritized image over results. The more these numbers circulated, the worse the Paige narrative looked. Clips of her uncontested shots were now paired with images of empty arenas. Headlines celebrating her scoring spree clashed with data showing that her presence alone wasn't filling seats. Fans asked the obvious question: if Paige was truly the chosen star, why wasn't her impact visible where it mattered most? Even Angel Reese, despite her struggles on the court, had a loyal following that helped drive conversations and attention. But Paige's supposed breakout moments seemed to exist only online, with little proof that it translated into sustained momentum. And when compared to Caitlin, who had become the league's ultimate draw, despite enduring hostile defenses and non-stop criticism, the contrast was devastating. At its core, the attendance and revenue reality exposed the biggest flaw in the push to elevate Paige. Stardom cannot be manufactured in a boardroom. Fans decide who they want to watch, and the numbers made their choice clear. But instead of calming the storm, this truth only deepened the divide, as the shadow of Caitlin Clark loomed larger than ever. The next question was inevitable: could Paige, or anyone else, escape it? No matter how hard the league or Paige Bueckers supporters tried to spin the 44-point explosion, every path led back to the same unavoidable reality. Caitlin Clark's shadow hung over the entire debate. It didn't matter if fans wanted Paige crowned as the new star, or if the league hoped to spotlight someone less polarizing. Every comparison, every highlight reel, and every online argument circled back to Caitlin, because she had already set the standard. And that standard wasn't just about scoring, it was about impact, consistency, and the ability to elevate the entire sport. Caitlin's presence on the floor was different. From the moment she touched the ball, defenses collapsed, rotations shifted, and teams scrambled to contain her. Opposing coaches built entire game plans around slowing her down, often sacrificing their own rhythm just to keep her from taking over. That relentless defensive pressure meant Caitlin rarely got a clean look at the basket, yet she still found ways to pile up points and rack up assists. The footage of her being swarmed stood in stark contrast to Paige gliding into wide-open shots, and fans didn't need advanced analytics to see the difference. They could feel it every time Caitlin stepped onto the court. This was why the legends and longtime analysts dismissed the Paige hype so quickly. They understood that scoring in a game where defenders barely raised their hands was not the same as clawing out 25 under constant harassment. Caitlin's performances were forged under fire. Her highlights weren't the product of defensive lapses, but of overcoming some of the harshest treatment any rookie had endured. And that, in the eyes of many, was why she remained the undeniable measuring stick for the league. The shadow extended beyond the hardwood, too. Economically, Caitlin was already in a league of her own. From ticket sales to TV ratings, from jersey numbers to sponsorships, she had become the engine powering the WNBA's growth. Fans lining up outside arenas weren't doing it for Paige or Angel, they were doing it for Caitlin. And even when her team struggled, the atmosphere followed her everywhere. For all of Paige's Polish and Angel's charisma, neither could replicate the once-in-a-generation magnetism Caitlin carried. The irony was that Caitlin herself didn't need to be in the conversation. She didn't publicly attack Paige, she didn't gloat about her impact, and she didn't feed the firestorm. Yet her shadow loomed larger than any PR push, making every attempt to elevate another player feel forced by comparison. Fans and legends alike sensed it. Greatness cannot be staged, and the harder the league tried to create an alternative, the more Caitlyn's authenticity stood out as the debates raged on. Paige's 44 points began to fade into the background. Noise. What remained was the unavoidable truth that no matter how much hype surrounded others, Caitlin Clark was the standard every player would be judged against. And, for the so-called woke fans, this reality was too much to handle. Spurking tantrums and meltdowns that pushed the controversy to its breaking point. By the time the debates reached their peak, the so-called woke fanbase that had been championing Paige Bueckers as the WNBA's next chosen star found themselves backed into a corner. What started as celebration of her 44-point performance quickly transformed into defensive tantrums when confronted with the cold, undeniable facts. Legends were dismissing the game as inflated, analysts were pointing to the lack of defensive pressure, and fans were stacking Paige's wide-open shots against Caitlin Clark's double-team daggers. Instead of calming down, these fans lashed out, doubling down on their narrative even as the ground beneath it crumbled. Social media became a battlefield. Paige's supporters accused critics of being jealous, biased, or stuck in the past, while skeptics fired back with receipts clips of uncontested jumpers, screenshots of empty seats, and stats that showed Caitlyn's dominance in every meaningful category. The more evidence piled up, the more unhinged the defenses became. Some fans even tried to rewrite the conversation entirely, suggesting that Paige's style was more watchable, that her calm demeanor was more marketable, or that she represented the future of the league simply because she didn't stir controversy. But these claims only highlighted the desperation. If the argument had to shift from performance and impact to intangibles like image, it was already lost. Meanwhile, Caitlyn's shadow loomed larger than ever. Every tantrum thrown online inadvertently brought more attention to her. Each time a fan tried to tear her down in defense of Paige, the conversation circled back to the undeniable truth. Clark was the one filling arenas. Clark was the one lifting her team into the playoffs, and Clark was the one proving she could thrive under relentless pressure. The very attempt to replace her in the conversation only made her position stronger. The meltdown reached a fever pitch when Angel Reese's name was dragged back into the mix. Fans desperate to salvage Paige's narrative began pointing to Reese's struggles as evidence that Clark's defenders were being unfair. But this tactic backfired spectacularly, as legends quickly reminded everyone that Clark, unlike Reese, had delivered wins under the heaviest scrutiny. The more names were thrown into the fire, the more obvious it became. Every comparison, every excuse, and every attempt to shift the spotlight only reaffirmed Clark's dominance by the end of it. The tantrums weren't about basketball anymore. Were about control. Fans who had invested in the Paige narrative couldn't accept that the league's numbers, legends, and public consensus all pointed in another direction. Instead of celebrating women's basketball's rising visibility, they tried to force a narrative that the game itself refused to support. And in doing so, they exposed the very fragility of the hype machine surrounding Paige's 44 points. The final takeaway was clear. While Paige remains a talented player with room to grow, no amount of online meltdowns or league agendas could erase the fact that Caitlin Clark had already set the bar. And for those still clinging to a different reality, Paige Bueckers' 44-point game against Los Angeles was supposed to be a celebration of talent. But instead, it ripped open one of the WNBA's most heated debates. Fans, legends, and analysts all came away with the same uncomfortable question. Were we watching pure greatness, or were we witnessing a staged showcase designed to elevate a league-chosen star? The evidence, the lack of defensive pressure, the empty arenas, and the contrast with Caitlin Clark's nightly battles, louder than any highlight reel. Legends reminded everyone that true greatness is forged under fire, not handed through favorable circumstances. And the fans' meltdowns only proved how desperate some were to rewrite reality. In the end, the controversy made one thing undeniable. Caitlin Clark remains the benchmark, the player who lifts the game both on and off the court. No amount of hype can replace authenticity, and no tantrum can erase the numbers that define impact.